Hello folks, this is Karl-James Langford on channel 01 This is a video log that is part of my sacred landscape series, sacred site series basically. It's a set of lectures that I put together for my Archaeology Cymru classes, and it went down very well. Now this site itself being Avebury, and this is me doing my Karl-James Langford lecture. First things first, that you can see with this image from an aerial photographic point of view, and you can see clearly that the stones on the left hand of the site are erect, and lots of the stones on the right hand of the site are not erect. Bit of a quick lecture really, but it's simply because most of the stones on the right hand side never ever existed. The guidebooks tell you that it was 98 to 100 stones standing around the site. The guidebooks also tell you that all these standing stones in a complete concentric circle were erected some 3000 to 2000 years BC, and the site was completed. I'm telling you that the site was never ever completed. From recent research agendas that we actually see coming from Orcadian archaeologists, it's possible that each stone that was erect at the site, not the ones that were never erected, each of the stones erected at the site represented a family that had moved into the area. Sockets in the ground were placed for other stones to be placed into the sockets, and they were never ever placed there. There are many theories to why stones were taken out of their sockets, were slighted, pushed over under the orders of the church in the medieval period, and so on and so on. But if the stones were never ever there in the first place, the sockets dug, then it goes to tell you that there's something else going on. The site was never ever completed, never ever meant to be completed. Even when you see stones lying flat, it doesn't mean to say that they've been pushed over. You do see signs of stones being broken off in the sockets. You see sockets completely absent of stones. Have anyone ever tried putting a big stone into a hole and then trying to take it out again? It isn't exactly easy to do. Looking at this site, trying to understand this site from an aerial photographic point of view, leads me to believe that the site was never ever in this completed state. I believe, however, there were actually 4 avenues leading into the site. Those 2 little sort of stringy little lines leading into the site from the left and the right hand corner, those are known as avenues. The one on the right, under the work of Alexander Keeler in the 1930s, when he brought the landscape and donated it basically to the state, when he was actually reconstructing the stones on the right hand side of the avenue, it was projected that there was an avenue on the left hand side, the Brockend-Hampstead Avenue, and there's only 2 stones actually still standing at that today, with a presumption on the left being an avenue from the evidence of only 2 standing stones. I'm saying that there were another 2 avenues leading into the site, and why not? Leading on to the level of the site being reconstructed in this way, there was a flat bottom ditch that was extensively excavated by the great benefactor Alexander Keeler. Now this flat bottom ditch itself was used to extract as much of the material out to create the great bank, the great henge around the monument as you can see it today. But one thing that can be said is that when the ditch was actually excavated, there were very few artifacts in there at all, indicating that the ditch was cleaned out on a very much regular basis. Talking about ideas for dates about this site is very, very mixed, because the archaeology has been contaminated over the years. We can presume that the ditch itself and the henge, the henge monument, was constructed way back in antiquity, over 5,000 years ago. As we see lots of these henge monuments being constructed very earlier, well before the wood henges, well before the stone henges. And case in point as well, we see through geophysics that the site at Avebury is completely dominated by thousands of post holes, and I'm going to say thousands, yes, Geophysics has gone nuts over the site. These post holes would have been for individual wood henge sites, for other stone sockets, for holes in the ground which they never had anything placed in them in the first place. Radiocarbon dates, however, tell us that lots of the sockets were excavated beyond 2,870 years BC. So again, not far after the henge monument was actually constructed. At Avebury itself, initially, there would have been a great causewayed enclosure site. Causewayed enclosure site, string of sausages, basically a bank, not a bank, which was constructed out of a ditch that was excavated between the individual ditches, concentric circle. There was a causeway, and in those ditches themselves, there were placed human remains, but that's another lecture altogether. This is a pure reconstruction of the West Kennet Avenue leading into the site, not the Brockhampstead one on the left, and the other two are purported from the northern axis into Avebury. There's no remains of them at all. This avenue itself is described in a very much sexual way. The tall, erect ones being phallic, and the fat, squat ones being feminine. But I don't actually go with that at all. I don't go with this sexuality of these monuments at all. Absolute nonsense. And I don't actually go with the fact that this site was a site constructed by Druids. Druids never ever existed. There's no evidence at all for Druids existing in the British Isles up until about the late 1600s. Full stop. This site was constructed for a completely different belief system than we associate today. Was it a ritual landscape? Was it a sacred landscape? Was it a religious landscape? Did it have some other meaning? We do not know. But certainly the site was never ever completed. It's blamed on the church. As I said before, in the 1400s, the church would pay individuals for pushing over the standing stones. There's little bit of evidence of somebody being found under one of the standing stones as excavated by Alexander Keeler in the late 1930s, 1938. But the individual was in a good state of preservation, and if a stone had collapsed on the guy as he was undermining it, his bones would be smashed to pieces. The guy was found with a coin dating to the mid-1320s from Edward II, and a load of instruments indicating that he'd been a barber surgeon. But why would a barber surgeon take a silver penny off the church to slide these stones? It doesn't make any sense. So this guy was there for a completely different reason. Lots of stones may have been destroyed out of action due to, for example, storm damage, as you see at the Ring of Brodgar. Lightning strikes destroying some of the stones. Some may have been deliberately destroyed in the 1700s by stone hunters visiting the site. Some may have been deliberately slighted in antiquity. Some may have just been lying on the floor, never erected. Whole sockets, stones never ever meant to be thrown in them in the first place. These stones are mega immense. Some of them weigh in excess of 40, 50, 60 tons in weight. Each of them representing individual families, individual belief systems over a long period of time. Contemporary rubbish. It's likely that this site was constructed over such a long period of time that the first person who erected a stone had a completely different meaning from a person a family who erected another standing stone. And you didn't need thousands of people to erect one of these standing stones at all. Lots of them may have been glacial erratics that were originally found on the landscape in the first place. Hence why the stone circle was placed here. The point is that this site is a true massive enigma. Moving on as well, and a beautiful theory I'm going to introduce. Some of these stones are in such a good state of preservation, and there's very little graffiti on them as compared to the Ring of Brodgar, simply because when Alexander Keeler and other people were excavating in the 1920s and 30s, these stones had been covered up in antiquity. They were never ever meant to be seen. Just like the standing stones at Durrington. By excavating these stones and putting them erect is a disservice, because most of them may have never been erected in the first place. So we've removed the soil around them because maybe they were never ever meant to be seen. Look at that theory. Lots of these stones are in such a good state of preservation and they show no signs of erosion simply because they had been covered up in antiquity and were never ever meant to be seen. Put that up in your pipe and smoke it. As you can see clearly there, what you find, you've got standing stones erect on the left, but lots of these were re-erected by Alexander Keeler. And the other thing as well is there's 2 other stone circles within the site. Pants to that, yes. But the fact of the matter is there were loads of wood henges within the site as well. The theory is that lots of the stones in a right-hand segment of this site, as you can see in the image, were demolished for the construction of the village. That's a bit queer, isn't it? And the reason why it's queer is the ones in the left-hand corner, lots of these are erect. Why did they pick on the ones in the right-hand corner? The reason why they didn't pick on the ones in the right, the reason why they picked on the ones in the right-hand corner, because they were never there in the first place. If you're going to build a building, you're going to use the ones that are practically in the center of the image there, and you're going to demolish them first before you go to the right-hand segment of the site. Vis-a-vis, because most of the ones on the right-hand segment were either never there or they were covered up and never ever to be found to be used in the medieval period. So the buildings in the center of the site use stones from those inner circles. And some of those stones from the inner circles, the south circle and the north circle, within the larger encompassment of Avebury. And let's give you a bit of scale about our wonderful site at Avebury, okay? The scale is 1,088 feet in diameter, 331.6 meters in diameter. If you ran from the north part of the site to the south part of the site, avoiding the traffic, it would take more than a couple of minutes to do so. This is how immense and massive this site is. A reminder, some of these stones are in excess of 40 to 50 tons in weight. And that is without any erosion, and that's without seeing what's below the surface. And I said that lots of these stones show no signs of erosion. They don't show any signs of erosion, but the ones that do show signs of erosion and the ones that are mega, just think of their original size. Look at that one, guys. Now, this site itself can be associated with other sites like West Kenner, Longbarrow, Silbury Hill, even its sister down in South Stonehenge, but none of them were all seen to be contemporary. They had different belief structures, different senses. Throw the Druids out the window and think about something else. And where I'm coming from with the fact that these stones were covered up, you look at Durrington walls, underneath a massive bank that runs around Durrington walls, okay, 1 kilometre in circumference. Geophysics has found out that underneath a huge bank at Durrington, there are standing stones which have been hidden. And I'm saying exactly the same with Avebury, okay? When you go to Avebury, there's something that I've really sensed. On the left-hand side, when you left-hand side of the site, so the west-hand side of the site, where the museum is and all the rest of it, you see all these standing stones, and it's very, very sort of stained with the sense of reconstruction, very much stained with the sense of meaningless sense. But when you actually go onto the right hand of the site, the eastern part of the site, there is actually some sense of sacredness about it, so it hasn't lost that. And I think it's probably because it's not dominated by these artifices of standing stones. I'm getting a lot of this evidence from geophysical surveys that have been carried out over the past few decades. It's showing a hodgepodge on the right hand side, east hand side of sockets with nothing in them, sockets with the remnants of stones. But the fact of the matter is, there's clearly no stones lying along most of the side of the eastern part of Avebury, and this is where I'm getting lots of my theories from. Looking at this image, I love this image. It shows a ditch itself, so you can get an idea of scale. So the bottom section, 2 meters, 4 meters, 6 meters, 8, maybe up to 10 meters deep, this ditch from the surface horizon. So if you go from the top of the bank to the bottom of the ditch, maybe up to, if you stand from the top of the bank looking all the way to the bottom of the ditch, you're looking at about 16 to 18 meters, okay? And And the other thing as well is the ditch itself is relatively so deep, and the ditch itself is basically inside the bank, and then inside that again you get a little bit of an escarpment, and then you get standing stones. So the other thing is, what I'm trying to say is that lots of the soil from the ditch are absent from the site. The volume of material taken out of the ditch outputs the volume used in the bank. So I'm saying that lots of that soil was used to actually cover up these stones. That some of them, as I've already said, are in a good state of preservation. And look at graffiti. When you go to Ring of Brodgar, all the stones, well, most of the stones at Ring of Brodgar are covered in graffiti from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, 1800s onwards. I don't use the word I don't say 18th century, I say 1900s. Anyway, so 16, 17, 18, 1900s graffiti, Ring of Brodgar, Orkney. But there's very little graffiti on these stones, indicating to me that when this site was being visited in the 17, 1800s, lots of the stones were actually covered up at ground level, okay, where you could see it today, because lots of this has been uncovered by Alexander Keeler, vis-a-vis given the good state of preservation. Nice illustration. We've got lots of illustrations from Aubrey and Stukely from the 1700s. And that's an indication from a causewayed enclosure site actually showing a bit of the rock cut ditch with antlers in it. Very little of this evidence was ever found at Avebury, again indicating that the ditch around Avebury was cleaned out on a regular basis. You go, another nice reconstruction over the years, always showing it complete. You know, it's these reconstructions that are always complete, never ever was completed. There's our Stonehenge. I'd love to give my lecture on Stonehenge, redo it. Maybe I will, but my theory about Stonehenge is that Stonehenge may have never been completed. Like Avebury, good state of preservation of the stones. Maybe some of them at times in antiquity have actually covered up. But as a worthwhile visit, I think Avebury is well worth a visit, because it gives you a sense of place, it gives you a sense of landscape, it gives you a sense of perspective, and that's very important. I think one thing that spoils it is the concrete markers placed in by Alexander Keeler, indicating sockets in the ground where stones once stood. Pants, they never stood in those spots either. There's signs of a great monolith standing in the southern circle. Whether a monolith ever stood there, I got doubts. Look at these two big beasts. These two big beasts in the foreground here are in excess 50, 60 tons in weight, maybe a lot more than that. But again, they were movable by our ancestors. Talking about enigmas, Avebury, again, is not the only enigma in the landscape. Silbury Hill, why that was constructed, maybe a vessel for our ancestors. So what we're going to do to intimate the look at these sacred sites, we've got one looking at Avebury. I've just done that. Sorry, it's getting late. I've got one looking at Silbury Hill and Marlborough Mound. So look into that one. I think you'll all enjoy that one. Hopefully get into more of this series, and hopefully you've enjoyed Avebury. But to recap, no such thing as Druids. Druids never ever worshipped at the site because they never ever existed. The church isn't responsible for the destruction of Avebury. The size of the stones, one thing I didn't say about the size of the stones, each of the stones is different in size, indicating that they were individually placed there by maybe an individual family over a length of time that meant that the original purpose of the site, why the stones were being placed there, was lost on the next people putting stones there. The bank itself, there may have been a bank which covered up the stones, as you see at Durrington. And overall, I would say that Avebury, from the sense of sacredness, the sense of place in the landscape, is well worth a visit. This is Karl-James Langford. Let's please have your comments. And this is a 20-minute lecture from a 2.5-hour lecture. I'm sorry I've rushed it. And thank you very much.